Hello. Well, let's get into chapter 5. I think we've covered a nice amount of chapters, so let's see what we've got in 5. And again, keep in mind that we're walking through the hierarchy, the evaluation hierarchy. Chapter 5 talks about theory evaluations. Theory evaluation is the second step in the evaluation hierarchy. According to Mears, in evaluation policy, theory serves much the same purpose as theory does in social sciences. It identifies the causal logic underlying a policy, such as how some factor, such as X, causes an outcome Y. Deterrence theory, for example, based for anticipating why punishment should lead to reduced crime. That's on page 94 and 95. And some of you are familiar with the deterrent theory, so you understand the idea of the policy is if we create a policy that would discourage people from committing crime, then what should that policy do? And then does that policy work? So that deterrence is the theory in which the policy is based on. Social policy rests on some theory, whether articulated or not. You should recall that we talked about need evaluation first, and now we're addressing theory evaluation. Mears says that these two types of evaluation can and should overlap, and he says that on page 95. He says a need evaluation is guided by theory. That points us towards probable cause forces, okay? So we want to keep all that in mind as we move through. Need evaluations and theory evaluations are integrated, okay? Or you can integrate them, okay? An effective policy rests on a sound theoretical or causal logic. That's on page 96. Theory evaluations are used and assess policies. Mears says that if a policy does not embody a set of expectations, assumptions, practices, reasonably accorded with theory, then he says that that's a problem. I mean, it's not likely to be effective. The basic ingredients of a policy as described by Mears involves three dimensions: the organizational plan, service utilization plan, and the impact theory. The organizational plan refers to how a policy will be implemented. The service utilization plan describes how specific aspects of the policy will be implemented. Impact theory has reference to how the policy design can be expected to cause intended outcomes. In this chapter, Mears talks about causal logic dimensions and policy goals and outcomes. He addresses dimensions such as targets, inputs, outputs, and short-term outcomes. In reference to policy goals, he discusses relevant goals as they connect to policy implementation, temporal sequencing of goals, and how models should distinguish between in-program and after-programs. Now, we'll hear more about this in-program and out-programs a little bit later on. Mears establishes that there is no single or best way to conduct a theory evaluation. He offers several avenues in how to perform such a task. First, he says, sometimes there is a documentation that explicitly describes a policy's theoretical foundation. Second, he says that there is an implicit program theory, or one that is not fully articulated. He says this later could very well help a person as they work to get ready to evaluate a particular policy. Mears establishes that there is no single or best way to conduct a theory evaluation. He offers several avenues in how to perform such tasks. First, he says sometimes there is a documentation that explicitly describes a policy theoretical foundation. Second, he says that there is an implicit program theory, one that's not fully articulated. This latter one will require some work on the evaluator's part. He says one way is to interview key decision makers and ask them to describe their understanding of the policy. Another strategy involved in reviewing policy documentation or using sites visits. He says programs may have reports or existing studies that may provide accounts of aspects of policies. Mears says that regardless of the source used, the ultimate goal consists of describing as completely as possible the assumed causal means-end relationship among all the different facets of a policy. And you'll see that on page 107. Once a policy theory has been identified, then evaluate its credibility. One may not be able to test every part of the theory, but the evaluator must test many of the critical assumptions upon which the theory is built. To do this, Mears offers several suggestions. You will read them in the chapter, but let me just highlight them for a moment. Number one, examine whether a policy theory targets a social problem that actually exists. Number two, review any prior needs evaluation, policy documents, decision makers and stakeholders' comments, and any existing theory and research. Number three, investigate whether social science theory or research exists to support all or part of the policy. Number four, observation of a policy or the conditions or population target that the policy is directed towards. This should include interviews with program leadership, personnel, or clients. Mears in this chapter reminds us that the importance of theory evaluation, first is that he says that theory evaluation can clarify the purpose of policies, including their goals and objectives. Second, theory evaluation can guide the development of theoretical foundation of existing or proposed policies. Third, theory evaluation can identify activities and services relevant to assessing policy implementation. Fourth, theory evaluation can identify dimensions that may influence whether a policy is found to be effective. Fifth, the theory evaluation can identify unintended harms that may result from a policy. Now, you're going to see that there's a lot in this particular chapter when you talk about theory evaluation. So you want to kind of keep that in mind. This seems to be a very important chapter. Mears is very concerned about the grounding of a policy in some type of theoretical foundation. In fact, when you look at it, this is probably a pretty large chapter compared to a number of the others, this one and the implementation. He acknowledges that many criminal justice policies are not well grounded theoretically. In the latter part of the chapter, he calls our attention to three areas that could influence theory evaluation and impact policies in some manner. He discusses the use of criminological theory, and if you've had the criminological theory class already, so you're familiar with that. He says that criminology provides a wealth of information on the causes of crime. He describes the existence of weak foundations, and most prominent criminal justice policies, he says, even today are somewhat weak. He talks about supermax prisons and sex offender laws as two examples. Finally, he addresses the problem with a silver bullet approach. He talks about this particular silver bullet approach. He says that for many of these problems that criminal justice tries to deal with, that there is no quick solution. There is no painless solution to resolving these problems. He says many of the problems or conditions that criminal justice policies have to deal with are widespread and very complex. Well, that seemed to conclude chapter 5. It is a long chapter. You'll find that out, but I think it has a lot of information in it. I hope you are hanging on to this information, because we will test our skills later on when we ourselves have to do an individual policy on a particular problem in criminal justice. Well, I suppose one could say that there seems to be a lot involved in policy making. And that's really probably very true. It seems as if Mears are telling us that probably, even though we've been developing policies, that we really have not been spending the time to realize in terms of what they're supposed to solve. So let's move into chapter 6. Now we move into what is called implementation evaluation. And if you're beginning to read and you seriously think about this, he's walking us through each one of those steps. Mears described implementation evaluation in the following manner. Implementation or process evaluations examine the activities associated with specific policies and practices and the extent to which the amount and quality of implementation accords with the idea, IDEAL, set forth in protocol, standards, or policy description. In this chapter 6, Mears describes implementation evaluations and their importance in developing, improving, and judging the performance of criminal justice policies. Implementation evaluation is step 3 in the hierarchy. It proceeds after the need for a policy has been established and its theoretical foundation has been established, tested, or refined. Mears says that the basic goal of an implementation evaluation consists of documenting whether a policy delivers the appropriate amount and types of operations, decisions, services, and activities to intended target in a high-quality manner. It does not establish whether a policy produces intended outcome. That step continues the next logical one after first establishing that a quality implementation has occurred. And you'll see that on page 132. Implementation evaluations sometimes are referred to as process evaluations. So the evaluator doing the implementation evaluation is checking out, investigating whether the policy is accomplishing what it's supposed to be doing. Mears says that there are two dimensions of implementation evaluation. First is the delivery of services or activities associated with a policy and whether it reaches, is access, or meets the intended population. Second, he talks about the dimension is concerned with a policy's operation, the mode or the quality of service delivered, and the activities undertaken. And then you'll see that on page 133. Hopefully, as you continue to go through the chapter, you will gather a sense that during the implementation evaluation stage, that the focus is on agents of the agencies in terms of them performing and taking the appropriate action and providing the services as described by the policy. Implementation evaluation is a way of determining whether a policy does what it's supposed to do. And you'll see that on page 138, so hang on to that. In this chapter, Mears describes how to conduct an implementation evaluation. Again, in other words, implementation evaluation involves monitoring performance of those responsible for carrying out the policy. One of the critical steps in implementation evaluation is what Mears identifies as conceptual. He says there needs to be a clear articulation of a policy's theory or design. Without it, we don't know what we are measuring. He talks about that on page 141. In a way, theory evaluation provides a roadmap, and implementation evaluation checks to make sure we're following the roadmap. A second item in relation to performing an implementation evaluation consists of clarifying precisely why an implementation evaluation is being sought or undertaken. A third item or area involves carefully determining which precise dimension of, number one, policy delivery, access, or use, and number two, policy operations should be measured, and that's on page 143. All three of these measures or items underscore the importance of clear conceptualization for improving and assessing policy. Mears discusses, as he moves through the chapter, the importance of implementation evaluation. In this area, he addresses the following. Number one, implementation evaluation can improve policy design and implementation. When used in this way, it is referred to as a formative evaluation, and that's covered on page 145. Implementation evaluation, number two, can facilitate performance monitoring efforts and help to hold organizations and agencies accountable. Number three, implementation evaluation can help inform interpretation of impact and evaluation and identify any null effects. After thinking about all of this, Mears says that the implementation failure may well constitute the primary contributor to policy ineffectiveness. Well, this concludes chapter 6. You see, that was really very short. And the basic ideal of implementation evaluation can identify whether the policy is being successfully done, conducted, and whether it is meeting its intended expectation. That's the end of chapter 6. So we'll move on to chapter 7 later.